Thank you all for coming. It's great to see so many people here. And thank you especially to Judith and to Tony, who are the experts. But before that, I'd just like to make a couple of comments. This is David's first solo show since he died in 2021. David, a native of Limerick, as most of you know, but he travelled widely in Kerry and depicting many of the places we're all familiar with, like Bannerstrand, Carrantoul, Ballyferriter, Smoke Harbour, Dingle, Valencia, amongst many others. His medium was dry point etching, often editioned as single proofs, and as such they're unique rather than multiples. Even his published series, like Borderlands, which stretches down that wall, which is the first time it's been exhibited, in fact, they were individually finished with watercolour and collage. So again, they're also unique. On the 28th of June, we'll be hosting a dry point and mapping workshop led by Leela Fenton, standing in the middle there. And if anybody's got any questions about the workshop, she'll be glad to answer them later on. Finally, there's just 3 days left to see another exhibition that we've put together in Killarney. That's an exhibition of 20 Kerry artists, and that's in the government offices in Killarney, and there's some leaflets about that by the flowers on the window there. Now I'd love to hand over to Judith, who's done an incredible amount of work cataloguing David's oeuvre, and she's been invaluable in getting together the information for all the captions. So over to Judith.
First of all, I'd just like to thank Romany and Robert for inviting me to say a few words about David's work. When I wrote this, I was thinking that most people here wouldn't have known David, so it's now I see that I was wrong. You must forgive me for saying some obvious things, perhaps. So the first obvious thing was that David was born in Limerick, and that he went away for about a decade to study at Trinity, and he worked in the Netherlands and studied in Italy, and then he came back to Ireland and then settled in Limerick and opened his studio, established a studio, and worked for about 30 years in Limerick, becoming a printmaker of national significance. And just to say about the prints themselves, I think they invite us to look at the details. And perhaps the most immediately notable thing that we see is the sense of energy and vigour in the lines. And this sense of vivid life was a thing that he pursued in his art. And it drew him to dry point as a technique because it's a very immediate print technique. And from the start, he discovered how to produce lines and other marks of extraordinary expressiveness, as you'll see when you look at the prints. He thought of printmaking as a form of drawing. In fact, his prints often come from sketchbooks drawings that were made quickly and instinctively as he walked, and he called them walking drawings. And you can see some of those in the sketchbooks that are over there. You also find in his prints other techniques. So, for example, with chine-collé images and symbols, often you might find a stamp or a photograph or something like that. And then he often put in text, and that might be written, or it might be printed, and it might be quotations, or it could be labels, it could be comments of his own. And sometimes it's in mirror writing as well, because it was done on the right side on the plate. And there's also a judicious use of watercolour, which you can see, which helps in many ways to bring the prints cohesively together and kind of contributes to the composition. And there's other techniques. Actually, I think that maybe the monoprints aren't on display, but there's also some monoprints were here as well, which is something else that he did a lot of. He also did a lot of watercolour as work in its own right. Now, the centrepiece of the exhibition, I suppose, is the Borderlands series. Although, having come here, I feel that there's plenty of other things as well. There's landscapes and maps. But the thing that I know Robert is very interested in political prints, and they are unusual in Dave's work in that they're overtly political, and they were some of his latest works. They were done in 2019 and 2020, which was just before and during COVID. And as I say, they're overtly political, and they depict controversial borders erected in different parts of the world to contain and divide people, which are often legitimized as attempts to protect people. So Romany told me that it was a photograph that set him off on this path, and the photograph showed a golf course in Ceuta, the Spanish enclave on the North African coast, and in the distance was a high wire fence, the border with neighbouring Morocco, and there, unmistakable, but apparently unseen by the golfers, were figures climbing over the fence, asylum seekers escaping from Africa into Europe. And that's all there in the print Nueva Entrada, which is just down there. The borderland prints are conceived as maps. And now this was a deep interest of Dave's, and it's part of many of his prints in different guises. And probably the best illustration of that is this sequence here, from the coast, the four plates from Youghal to Smerwick Harbour. And it gave him a bird's eye view, and it allowed him to show relationships of buildings and streets and rivers and roads and all that sort of stuff, and also people and activities. And it was a symbol and a metaphor, and also a technical thing, a way of bringing a lot of things together in the prints. So it brings together ideas in the Borderlands series as well. And quite often it shows the path of the wall. So there's the Berlin Wall, there's the Irish border, there's the West Bank Wall, or separation barrier. And these, if you look at those maps, those prints, the borders are different. So the Irish border is very graphic. And then it's just a line. But some of them, the West Bank border is shown in kind of bristling detail. And you get a much stronger sense of it as a personality, if you like, in the landscape. And often then there's images of people doing things, and one of the ones I just pull out was the Berlin Wall, and you see the sort of militarized life on the east side, and then the more civilian, kind of exuberant civilian life on the west side, and which really reflects the way we all thought about the Berlin Wall and about Germany before the wall came down. Robert Carter has picked other political prints too, and one of them is just down there, is on Banner Strand. It's the 1916, it's the story of Roger Casement swimming ashore at Banner Strand on Good Friday 1916. And of course, it's a subsequent arrest. So in this print, for example, you can see Casement's, he gives an impression of Casement's experience in the words he used in a letter he wrote to his sister. And in the letter he wrote, "I was for one brief spell happy." This is after he'd come ashore. And that's inscribed on the right edge of the print. And then there's a big technical, kind of quasi-technical images of the submarine that he had been brought to the shore in. And then there's a photograph of Casement, and there's views of the beach, there's the sand dunes, the birds that he also describes to his sister. And there's a wonderful ship as well. So there's all this kind of detail, which is all related to the subject, but it's brought together in a very Dave Lilburn kind of way. And then there's a circular print, which I didn't see either, which was Within Requirements, which is a very interesting little print, which again refers to the plights of migrants. Now, as I say, there's a lot of other types of prints here, and there's there were four monoprints, which came from a sketchbook. And these are very interesting because they show Dave interesting colour and also shape, which you don't get so much of that impression from these prints. And then there's two lovely little prints, the Eel Weir in Killaloe from the Killaloe series, and Limerick from the Footprint series, which is a very interesting little series. And these are little lyric renderings of place in a way. They're full of shared stories and personal stories and public stories as well. And then there's two prints relating to the Flaggy Shore, which are very interesting because they show him in a particularly minimalist mood, I think. And he brings that landscape down, which he knew so well, into just a few lines, and so well, particularly the lower one does that, just a few marks really. And then finally, I just mentioned the zinc plates, which there's one zinc plate there from the Loop Bridge print. And this is one of the 7 plates that make up In Media Res, which was his interpretation of Joyce's Ulysses, which was commissioned by the National Library in 2004, and it's probably his masterpiece. And you can see it in the University of Limerick and also in the National Library. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you, Robert, Lucy, and Roman, and all the people who invited me here today. Now, I'm after driving down from Dublin this morning, so my head is a bit zoom, zoom. And I was surprised a few weeks ago when Robert says, we'd like you to come down and launch, or help to launch Dave Lilburn's exhibition. And I said, why? I write poetry. And he says, because Romany wants you to come. So I said, well, I'll come. And they say Dave and I did 2 books together. But we actually did 3 books. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But the last book we did together, and the reason I know I was with him on this day 6 years ago, because today is the day that the greatest flight of all time took place when Alcock and Brown flew from Newfoundland to a field or bog in the west of Ireland. And it's one of the greatest stories ever told, and one of the greatest flights. And Dave and I did this book. It was very funny how things come together, because what happened was a Dominican nun, cleverest woman in Ireland, Margaret McCurtain, she asked me to take her to the bog where Alcock and Brown landed their plane. And I wouldn't take her, she was 83, it's a long story. But I took her out to where the tail of the plane was, where you could stand on the road. And she looked out over the bog on a glorious day. And she said, where were they from? And I said, John Alcock was 26, and he was from Manchester, Old Trafford. And Arthur Quinton Brown was 32, and he was from Glasgow. And she said to me, I thought they were Americans. And I said to her, Margaret, you're the cleverest woman in Ireland, and you think they're from America. What do the stupid people think? And that's where the book came from. I usually read the poem that tells the story, but I won't. If I can, I'll just read you. They took off. Oh yeah, that's the other thing. I thought the day was chosen. Today was chosen because of the launch. You know, the plane launched, and now we launched Dave. And Roman says, "This is the 14th." But and I thought what was even better was the fact that they chose the exact moment the plane took off. At this moment, 106 years ago, the boys were on the field. They had wanted to go yesterday. They had wanted to go on Yeats' birthday. The navigator was a big Yeats fan. But when they loaded the 900 gallons onto the plane, the axle broke. So they went today. But just before they took off, I'll just read you what happened. Just before they took off, this is what happened. The Sky Road. Just as we were about to take off, the chief engineer climbed up beside us and roared above the engine's roar that he had installed the safety equipment. The safety equipment? Yes, he said, 2 walking sticks and a bottle of brandy. If you go down out there, it'll be a long walk home. I thought of it, 2,000 miles along a dark, empty road, without hedge or turn, every step open to the icy northern winds. So that's Dave's cover, and that's beautiful paintings by Dave. And the other book we did was this book. This is called Pony by Tony. And we used to work with Ballinhinch Castle. It was the only time my wife ever came to poetry readings that I gave was in Ballinhinch Castle. And so the last day I met Dave, he gave me this painting, this drawing of the 2. That hangs in my hall. And John Berger on the back of this book. There's no blur. I won't allow any blurbs in the back of my books. And but on the paperback, they slipped the blurb on. And John Berger says a lovely thing. I think he mistakenly says it. He says, you cannot have these poems without the paintings. They are fused together. And I think that's really true. So if somebody will help me read one of these poems, because what happened was Dave, they said, you write poems about Connemara ponies. And I said to Dave and Jim, I says, I will, but there's a technical hitch. And they said, what's the technical hitch? I says, I'm from Dublin. I know all about taxis, cars, buses, skateboards. I know nothing about ponies. So they brought me down. And I was going around calling them horses. And my friend, Sean Halpin, he grabs me and he drags me down a lane and he said, for God's sake, stop calling them horses. They're digging the head. So I do this poem with 5-year-olds. So if anybody has me read it, I give them a copy of the book. If anybody wants to do the book, all you have to say is, you know a pony by its mane.
Go on.
All you have to do is, you know a pony by its ears, by its mane, by its, not name, mane, coat, eyes. I'll do the big lines.
Great.
You want to say anything before you?
No, thank you.
Do you want to show them the drawing that you did by this one? It's very hard to do that, to do a straight on to a pony. He had this amazing ability to just look at a pony and draw it. Anyway,
Ethan is his son-in-law, just for reference.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry.
It's very
I met you before.
Yeah, you did. Very square. And I met you, obviously.
Yeah, have you already got a copy of this book?
Yeah, I think, yes, we do. Yeah.
They're going to say it's a setup.
Just save yourself a copy to
Does
it.
anybody else want to do it? Who doesn't have a copy? No.
We have all your work.
Thanks for checking. I paid them to say it. So you just, I had to write this poem because most people in Dublin would call a Connemara pony a horse. And it is an entirely different creature. Like it, and then I now know, because I've written 46 poems about it, it's like the difference between a bee and a wasp. Did you see that movie about Mr. Holmes, called Mr. Holmes, where he's on the train and the bee lands on the window? No. I should be speaking. Gandalf, what's his name?
Ian McKellen.
Ian McKellen, he's a great actor. He does Sherlock getting dementia. Okay, you do the first one.
Okay. After 7 photographic portraits of a great Connemara pony, you will know a pony by its ears,
Listening out for weather forecasts and love songs.
by its mane,
Tossed over its eyes like a witch's broom.
by its coat,
Always buttoned up, tight-fitting, dusty, well-worn.
by its eyes,
That knows you, lifts the pony's head to let it know you're coming.
by its hooves,
Made for dancing and so worn at the tips.
by its mouth,
It loves to eat words given with pats of the hand.
by its nose,
That knows you and lifts the pony's head to let it know you're coming.
by its tail,
That conducts the symphony of bird song, lake song, white song that is the bog underfoot here above the village of Killarney. It doesn't say that there. Thank you very much.
good change.
Do you want to give that to Judith? Now, just show you something before I go. I said we did a third book. When we were much younger, about 20-something years ago, we used to do classes down at Allerheath. And we'd meet all these people down there. We had a great time. I loved Allerheath. And so one day at the end of the course, Dave, he got the students just in an afternoon just to put together 3 books. One for me, one for Paul Meehan, one for Theo Dorgan. And I only took it out yesterday just to look at it. And you can see Dave all over it in the pictures, in the drawings. Like I'd have to think for 6 weeks before I even attempt to do this type of thing. But Dave was just, he was what you say, production line. So I wrote a new poem this week for Dave, and the old poem I wrote for him after he died, I amended that. Remember what Robert Byrne said about himself? I'm a maker of new poems, mender of old. So I can understand that now. I didn't understand it when I heard it first. Now I understand. This is called Life Studies. Dave and I first met in Allihies, the craggy artistic haven at the end of the Beara Peninsula. We were there with a group of American students. Dave did art, I did poetry. We gathered in the old schoolhouse. I did mornings, Dave did afternoons. I liked the room peaceful, with everything in its place. By the end of the first afternoon, Dave and his students had turned the room into a Siberian blizzard of crumpled charcoal papers. The floor and the walls were covered in pages torn from sketchbooks. When I looked, most were drawings, the outlines of mountains and empty fields. It was all eye and observation, though occasionally a handful of words prayed to themselves in the corner of a page. On the third day brought painting in watercolour. The room slowly turned from winter to summer. Long rows of brightly coloured paper hung drying on lines, strung high across the room. I sat under them, captivated. There were green mountain ridges, yellow windows under the dark night, a black bicycle against a red wall, a flock of birds going out to sea at evening, a fuchsia lane meandering off into the eternal. By the fourth day, I noticed we had moved away from making sonnets and elegies, poems of famine, loss, immigration. We began writing nature poems, haiku, those small tree-lined Japanese poems about what is there before our eyes or hanging from the ceiling. Maybe the colourful paintings had brightened and lightened our souls. On the last morning, I saw Dave walk past the schoolhouse, hat on, sketchbook in hand. He was off in search of life, his life studies. A man with charcoal and a small piece of paper can bring home the world. I was saying to Romany, I'm a very superstitious poet, and I wrote 3 poems this week. I wrote 2 for Dave and 1 in the middle. And I said to her, it's like having children. It's not right to do one and then not do the other. So I was commissioned to write a love poem, and so I wrote a love poem in the middle of writing 2 poems about Dave. And maybe it was that. Can I read the love poem?
Yeah,
I'll finish with a poem. So this is the first time I've ever read, but that's the first time I read that one, obviously. This is the first time I'm reading this one. This will appear in a book in January. It's called The Abandoned Dance Hall, after painting by Mick O'D. Michael used to say, I love the abandon in abandoned things. Is there anything more abandoned than an abandoned dance hall? We knew when the young were leaving the island, the dance hall would close. Old people didn't need a hall to dance. They danced to the sound of rain on the roof, to wind whistling through a dry stone wall, a button accordion lilting in air under a full moon. The hall is now just bricks and broken glass, but its walls still shelter ghost memories, young men and women the years have forgotten. His eyes were vast blue oceans. I saw him coming through the dark to rescue me, an Orpheus with a great head of black hair, a smile as bright as a boat under sail, and a white-shirted body of pulsing blood and bone. When he moved, I felt a whispering in my soul. Having been raised on a farm, I knew a good bull when I saw one. My old grandmother had taught me that even the best of them are nervous and easily startled. So I shook out my hair, unbuttoned 2 buttons, then crossed the boards and led him out to pasture. That short distance, from one westering heart to another, began the long, fierce dance of our lives. So, I'm absolutely delighted to be asked to come along today. And I'll finish with this poem and then I'll do a song. My mother says, bring the guitar. Not everybody likes poetry. Some people are dragged along. So she said, sing a song. But I can see the dilemma. With a book of poems, you just walk into the room, you listen to the poet and buy the book. But when you come to an art gallery, there's so much choice. And the Irish, we're not great at choice. You know, we're great at saying what we don't like. But to say what we do like, that causes heaps of problems. See, I like all the paintings. I love the one with the submarine. But then I said, well, my wife likes a submarine on the wall. In the world we're in at the moment, I'm spoiled for choice. I'll pick one. They're very reasonably priced.
Special discount.
Yeah. And I always feel when I do when I talk about Dave, a lot of what I say also applies to Jim Savage. You know, I see the two of them. I've been like Mark and Wise. I've been like Lorna Hardy, Smith and Wesson. We're so together. You know. That's the last meeting I had with Dave. We were discussing doing a tribute book for Jim. It'll never happen because without Dave's, I could write 10 sonnets, but it wouldn't be the same. Anyway, this is the poem I wrote, and 3 years ago I wrote this poem, and I amended it this week. It's called The Printmaker and the Poet, Mapping the Old Bog Road. And John Berger says, and the first generic impulse to draw derived from the human need to search, to plot points, to place things, and to place oneself. And Dave was a great fan of John Berger, and so was I, because of the blurb on my book. Let me take you back. It was a bright June morning. Dave and I were walking the old bog road. The mountains and the sky were ignoring us, just getting on with their day. Then, almost to himself, Dave said, this is where Buddhists come for balance, a block of air on each shoulder, walking into the light. It was like listening to a soft jazz riff being played on an old saxophone. So I had to ask, are we balanced, Dave? Do we have a pencil in each hand as we walk into the light? Are we Buddhists? No, he said, we're wanderers, searchers, pioneers, I said, like Alcock and Brown. That's it, said Dave. We are dreamers, drifters, huckleberry friends, I said, and began singing Moon River. Two drifters off to see the world. We walked on for a while in sunlight and birdsong. Dave, do you know poets say musicians come to Connemara to borrow tunes from the wind, from the sounds the fairy folk make, playing their fiddles and pipes? They say once you've heard this music, its enchantment is in your soul forever. Like the printmaker's touch, said Dave, the artist's gaze. That morning walk along the old bog road was 6 years ago this week. I now know Connemara is where the souls of painters and printmakers go to lay down their brushes, their pencils, their sketchbooks, to release their light back into the air. Lord only knows how they do this, but the old books say it is always at night, their light so pure it only comes through in stars. Right. For all people who don't like poetry, I'm going to sing a poem. This is probably the last song Dave would have heard me sing. We sang it at the launch of the Alcock and Brown book. I sang Moon River, you know, for Alcock and Brown. Two drifters off to sea. And if you have any fear of flying, and you're in London, go to the Science Museum. It's free in. Walk to the back of the museum, and put your hands on the plane, on the wings of the plane, Alcock and Brown flew. And once you've seen that plane, you say to yourself, if they could fly in this across the ocean, you could fly in any.
Tony, were you in that museum and you saw that they had done something wrong? They had
No, I went into the morning after I finished the book. I went into the museum. I said to my wife, "I'm going to see the plane now."
Yeah.
I didn't want to see the plane before I wrote the book until I finished it. And when I went and saw the plane, it was even more of a kite than I imagined. You know. And then I read the signs. There were about 9 signs around it, and every sign was wrong. Every single sign. And there's a guy sitting on a chair. Another way, he didn't know whether I was going to rob the plane or try and take off. And I went over to him and said, I gave him my card. I said, Tony Curtis. And I said, my name is Tony Curtis. I've just written a book on that airplane. And you can tell your boss that for £250, Tony Curtis will fix up all their signs. Because this is meant to be an educational facility.
Yeah.
I said, even the first sign in front of the plane saying they took off with no test flights. I said, you Google that in 2 seconds. They had a test flight on the 9th, a test flight on the 12th, and then they took off today. And yeah. And if you have any questions on Alcock and Brown, I'll answer them. Any questions on Dave Lilburn, Judith or Roman?
Did you get the commission to change?
No, they never can. Obviously, some mad Irishman. Some mad Irishman yesterday. Your hand isn't there, must be obvious. Putting on the steering wheel. So I sing Robert Frost. I put it to music, and it's about Borderlands. And if you all want to sing along, if you've all done it at school, you'll wonder whose what's these are. What these are, I think I know. This house is in the village, though you will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. Ooh, ooh, to watch his woods fill up with snow. A little horse must think it's queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the wood and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. Ready? Ooh, ooh, the darkest evening of the year. Gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there's some mistake. The only other sounds sweet of easy wind and downy flake. Ooh, ooh, easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep. Miles to go before I sleep. Miles to go before I sleep. Ooh, ooh, miles to go before I sleep. Ooh, ooh, miles to go before I sleep.
Wow.
Do you want to finish the talk? Because you're the most important.
Boss.
You're the boss, yeah.
I know, I wasn't going to, but that first of all, I want
Because
to sing
Dave
to
was the
you.
worst in the world.
Yeah, but so am I.
Are you?
Anyway, I cannot not go and not thank Robert, where's Robert, and Lucy. David, this exhibition came to be about, when was it, about 2-3 years ago, Breda came past here on a trip, and she saw the gallery, and she saw that there were all maps. And then she said, do you know about Dave Lilburn's work? He does maps as well.
Yes.
And then Robert had a look at the website, and then he rang me. And he said, are you interested? And I said, in principle, yeah, but I wasn't ready for it yet, because there's all kinds of things going on, and it was a bit too early. So, but Robert was really, really patient, and he said, okay, when you're ready, just tell me. So then later he tried again, still not ready. And then he came again and he said, yeah, now I think I'm ready to start.
Yeah.
And go in the studio and have a look. There are thousands of prints. He has worked so hard and all beautiful. So I thought, yeah, there has to come a time that I let go of it. So Robert and Lucy, they I don't know where he is, but I want to thank them, really both, and especially Robert, for being so patient. First of all, for thinking of it, then going ahead with it, then staying with it and being so patient with me. Never got upset if we had to wait very long for information or whatever, when I was being chaotic. And then I come here, I've never been here yet, and I come to this lovely, beautiful gallery, and I see Dave's work up like that. So I'm really, really grateful to them. And I also very grateful to Judith, because I just asked you, and then Judith said, yeah, I'll do it. And Judith knows Dave's work very well, and Judith came one time to me and said, can I take some photograph or catalog a bit photo? And I said, that was the first time that I let people officially in the studio. And I knew that Judith would do a good job. Judith is very, she knew Dave's work, she loved Dave's work, and I knew she would be very respectful, she wouldn't be pushy. So for months, was it months?
Yes.
Yeah. I think Judith didn't know what she got in for, and then there was so much work. And then we worked, and Judith came and she took a photograph. And the nice thing was that Judith would look at the print and she said, what's that there now? So, and just looked for a long time to see what it was about. Now it could be anything with Dave. And Dave made the prints, he would be working and he would be, say the radio would be blaring, and then he would hear a song. And part of that song might go in the print. Yeah. Or he heard some birds outside and he would put a bird in as well. And so Judith was great in going with all that, and so at the end we did it all, and it was then very brilliant to be able to use it when we had to sort out all the prints. And I was thinking of that print as well, because I read a tiny bit about, came across a tiny little blurb what Dave said when he was doing that print. I think he sailed part of it, and he said you could sit. He said you could sit in the boat when the wind was coming from behind, and you sat and you could open the doors even when it was very windy, and sit there with your sketchbook and do all your sketching while the boat was moving on. So, and then he was very much a historian as well, and he knew a lot of the politics. So he put all the historical points as well. If you go deep in the print, it's like what Jim Savage said one time in pieces he wrote. You can get lost in the print. You know, you start with a little thing and you think, oh, there's a mountain, and then before you know,
enjoyably lost.
Yeah.
Enjoyably.
Oh God, you have a better memory than I.
You get lost. You get enjoyably lost.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. And it is true. So we did it a few times with Judith. You know, we couldn't figure it out, and we had the mirror saying, "What does it say?" Because it's cut often back to front. Sometimes he would think of it, and I would do it the other way around, and you would see it. But it's always a mine of information. But it's a lot as well what he was thinking of at the moment, and so it's not all traceable anymore. I remember that print from where you. Which was saying about the Borderlands. The Borderlands series started with a photograph in the paper. Was it Irish Times? I forget. Anyway, it was a photograph, and in it you see people playing golf, and they are just playing golf, is fine. And soon you see on the background, you see this fence, and there's people climbing over and say, what's going on there? And then we realize people trying to get in and flee. But the golfers are just, you know, teeing and birdieing and whatever they're doing without paying any attention to what's there, and they're so taken back by that. Then he started the series, and John, what you said earlier on, you know him as a humanitarian upstanding Mr. Collecting was the birth of Amnesty International, because Dave did that for years in Limerick as well, and led the group. So then he was so upset about what's going on, so that you get Israel, what is it now, Cyprus, Northern Ireland, and through the whole thing. And so he was so interested in so many things. And also he had this store of, I don't know where it came from, also this store of knowledge in his head all the time. He just had it so he could put it in as well. And we said one time, Casper and Lily were walking in the woods, and he said, what's that plant and what's that bird? And we didn't know, and he said, if Dave was here, he wouldn't know at all. So he said, we better go and do a bit of study in the books of the birds and the plants. We have lost our man to do it. So he had so many angles to him.
He's a lovely man.
So, and he was.
He was the best, him and Jim, they were very best company. You know,
he was always a joy. When Dave came in, you knew it would be good. There was enjoyment always there.
But it's very easy to work with. You know, when I worked for him, doing like when I was at the Ennis Book Festival, I wrote all the poems about the ponies, and then at the Ennis Book Festival, I read them, and Dave sat in the audience, listened to them. And like when I met him afterwards, I could see his eyes were going round. And I said, "But they are a bit more bendy than I thought they would be." The poems, and he said, "Well, then I'll make wild and bendy paintings." A drawing, and that's what he did.
I almost want to say he couldn't but make bendy paintings, but that's of course not true, because if you look there at the
do you know who he reminds me? He reminds me sometimes of Van Gogh. Van Gogh, what do you want to call him? When he just do these landscapes and he do these portraits of people, and you knew the person, but they weren't. You know, the features were there, but not. You know, it wasn't a portrait. He wouldn't hang it over the.
Oh.
You know, like Dave's own self-portraits. You couldn't say they flattered him.
No, he never did. And I remember somebody sent us one time a letter with, he was a secondary school teacher, and he had brought the students to a gallery, and one of the pieces there was portrait of Dave. And then later they had to write an essay about what they had seen. And then he had written, because he said, I like the exhibition, but what about your man with the self-portrait? How can anybody put that up in an exhibition? And the last line was from, and I love it.
And his wish was the other thing. He was very like James Joyce. He was full of wit, but clever wit. To get the joke, you actually had to have read a history book or a piece of, you know, politics. It wasn't easy, but he was always witty, irreverent. That should all be there.
And
I shouldn't say anything, sure I shouldn't, but anyway, just give my opinion.
So and also I want to say that as well, when I finally said to people, oh, there's an exhibition going on, and I wasn't sure, you know, should I tell them or not tell, and because I don't want to give the impression that they have to come. And then it was the enthusiasm of all the people, of all my friends, dear friends, and the people I know, who actually made me in the mood then and said, yeah, it is a good thing, it's lovely to do it. So thank you so much all for coming.